Earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis. We all know the damage and expense they can cause, but no one thinks about the one natural disaster that is occurring every day, every second. It's a silent, insidious, pervasive menace that can cause even more damage and cost even more money. So what are we talking about? Corrosion. What exactly is corrosion? Corrosion is technically defined as a degradation of materials in its environment. A simpler explanation? Rust. Hi, I'm LeVar Burton. Join me as we journey to some of the most corrosive places in America. Our nation's infrastructure is under constant and unrelenting attack. In 2007, Minnesota's fifth busiest bridge suddenly collapsed. 13 people lost their lives and 145 others were injured. These disasters, as well as more than a dozen others over the past 40 years involving major bridges, overpasses, and highways collapsing, have all been at least partially attributed to corrosion. In 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 suffered extensive damage in mid-flight. Though able to land, a flight attendant lost her life and 65 others were injured. The Alaskan oil spill in 2006 had a major impact on BP and the Alaska Pipeline Service, which is the company that runs the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. A dime-sized hole caused by corrosion let over 5,000 barrels of crude oil spill out of the pipeline. The leak and the subsequent discovery that 6 miles of pipeline was badly corroded led to the shutdown of much of the Prudhoe Bay oil field and the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. These corrosion-related incidents are just some of the cases that cost the U.S. economy billions of dollars each year. The United States Department of Defense knows that if corrosion is ignored, many other tragedies lie ahead. But now, let's bring this closer to home. When I say rust, you may think of something like a backyard grill. Now, think about every grill in America, and not just grills, but all of the things that are made out of metals and other compounds that corrode. The list is endless. What's fascinating here is that when we explore the science of corrosion, we find that some environments are more likely to produce severe corrosion than others. The coastlines usually have the highest levels of corrosion, but you can find corrosion everywhere, even in a desert. So before we head off to some of the most corrosive locations in the United States, let's explore the parameters at one of the least corrosive locales, the desert environment, where hot air, low humidity, and trace amounts of atmospheric salts make corrosion possible. But the rate is extremely slow. When talking about critical atmospheric conditions in general, moist air is more corrosive than dry air. Hot air is more corrosive than cold air. High humidity is more corrosive than low humidity. Polluted air is more corrosive than clean air. And salt water is more corrosive than fresh water. And of course, we all know this one. Acids are more corrosive than soils or salts with high pH. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that we have determined that the Southern California desert is one of the least corrosive environments. We now say goodbye to the mainland and venture into one of the most corrosive environments, the Pacific. Hawaii is a very good example to start with, as it is a microcosm of the rest of the world. It's made up of more microclimates than any other place its size on Earth. This means that there are many different types of climates, all located within a short distance of one another. But today, we are not here purely for a visit. Kaneohe Bay is on our list of the most corrosive places in America. Marine Corps Air Station Kaneohe Bay is located in Honolulu County, Hawaii. It was a major training base in the Pacific Theater during World War II and was attacked on December 7, 1941. Today, the base has been redesignated as an air station and sits on the eastern side of Oahu.
The Marine Corps has 4 major bases, all great places to visit, but as far as corrosion goes, they're all very severe. One of the foundations of our corrosion prevention and control, also known as CPAC, is identify, correct, and maintain. This asset right here, this water bowl, has reached a category corrosion 4. As you can see, there's multiple versions of rust, but we actually have penetration through the surface. This asset will be sent to the corrosion repair facility where it will be blasted and repainted and brought up to a category 1. And the final element is to maintain it, which we use through our dehumidified shelters or our trans-shield covers.
Kaneohe Bay rates a whopping 29,800 on our corrosion severity test scale of steel. This means that an unprotected piece of carbon steel had a weight loss measured in micrograms per square centimeter per year. Now, in comparison, the desert we just left rated only 2,000 on our scale.
The scale that we're talking about is often referred to as the Environmental Severity Index, or ESI. It's derived in a fairly simple manner. A standard package of materials are put out in operational environments, remain there for a known period of time or a series of times. They're returned to the laboratory where the films are chemically removed, and one comes up with a weight loss expressing the amount of material that has been removed due to corrosion.
In fact, a test site on Coconut Island rates 32,600 on our scale. Wheeler Army Airfield was the site of several major historic aviation events, including the first Hawaii to mainland solo flight in 1935 by Amelia Earhart, who flew from Wheeler Field to Oakland, California. It was also involved in the infamous Pearl Harbor events of 1941, where the Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft attacked Wheeler without warning. Located nearly in the middle of Oahu, Wheeler still has great challenges when it comes to mitigating corrosion and comes in at 51,400 on our scale.
As far as operating here in Hawaii, the high salt content of the atmosphere, plus flying near the ocean, creates its own challenges as far as inspections go. We usually run our corrosion inspections 15 days apart, which is an in-depth inspection that could create anywhere between 3 to 4 hours on a good aircraft that doesn't have much in corrosion, that has been kept on top of, to a 2-day, depending on the atmospheric conditions and how much rainfall has happened within the past couple of days.
From one part of this beautiful island to another, let's visit Oahu's southern coast. Now this time, we're heading to Hickam Air Force Base by the city of Honolulu, now part of Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. During World War II, the base was the hub of the Pacific Aerial Network, ferrying troops and supplies to forward operating areas. Hickam and Honolulu share the fight on corrosion every day. Corrosion can cause havoc in infrastructure and equipment operations not only on the base, but in the city of Honolulu itself. In fact, hotels in Hawaii have spent millions on remodeling and efforts to mitigate corrosion. If we take a look at our data collected, we see a hot, salty environment that is on the receiving end of the trade winds, a rate of 55,800 on our corrosion severity scale.
I think what makes Hawaii so challenging in terms of corrosion is that we have a lot of different climates here in Hawaii, and we also have our fair share of pollutants in the air and acid rain from the volcano. And we also have areas that are really wet and humid all the time. So the corrosion process doesn't really have a chance to slow down throughout the seasons.
Just 20 miles from Hickam Air Force Base is the Coast Guard Air Station at Barbers Point, which supports one of the most environmentally diverse of all Coast Guard operating areas. These Guardians of the Pacific are commissioned to protect 14.2 million square miles of open ocean. And they would not be able to fulfill their mission if they were to allow corrosion to get the better of their equipment. Conditions at Barbers Point pose unique and severe challenges.
Here at the University of Hawaii, we're working on a bunch of things to sort of mitigate or prevent corrosion. We're testing different types of coatings that could be applied to metals that will slow down the corrosion process. Is a rainforest environment worse for a particular material than a marine environment? It's easy for someone to say, yes, this is corroded, yes, this is not corroded, but how much worse is one compared to the other? And that's where I think Hawaii is a very interesting place to study corrosion.
From the Pacific, to the Gulf of Mexico, no place is safe from the dangers of corrosion. We are heading from Hawaii to the coast of Texas so we can visit the sparkling city by the sea, Corpus Christi.
Corpus Christi is known as one of the most premier tourist destinations in the state of Texas. We're renowned for our fishing and beach activities. We absolutely have problems with corrosion. It's an issue we tend to deal with on a fairly constant basis, mostly because we have wind speeds that seem to be 35 miles per hour every day. We also try to attack some of those elements by using alternate materials and methods of sealing. The historical sites in Corpus Christi are also exposed to these weather elements every day. We've tried to address those concerns by adding, again, additional materials such as resin and plaster to complement the existing historic structures. One perfect example is the Copini statue just behind me.
Now let's check on the atmospheric conditions here in Texas at Coast Guard Air Station Corpus Christi. This air station became fully operational on October 15, 1980, but it suffers from continuous attacks by our dreaded enemy, corrosion. We've all heard the expression, location, location, location. Well, being directly on the ocean has its perks, but not when it comes to corrosion. Something as simple as moving only 1/4 mile inland makes a huge difference when it comes to the severity.
Since our air station is in such close proximity to the water, our corrosion is far more worse than being even 10 miles inland. So most of the types of forms we get is usually a surface intergranular, which it starts off out on the surface. It starts attacking in between the aluminum, and most of the aircraft is aluminum, so it attacks that. And there are certain areas as far as like under decks, which will accumulate water exactly where I'm sitting right now. Sometimes we find bad corrosion, sometimes it's just moderately corroded. Water always finds a way in.
We still have data collected which shows the situation in Texas is pretty severe, with a reading of 118,400. The shores of Florida facing the Gulf of Mexico are just as susceptible to the elements of corrosion as those on the other side. Our next stop is Tampa Bay, Florida. Not only a large harbor in the state, it's also a natural estuary along the Gulf. MacDill Air Force Base is located here in Tampa. The base exists to provide everyday mission support for the United States Central Command and the United States Special Operations Command. To combat salt deposits, MacDill has set up a rinse facility which is like a car wash for airplanes. Upon every landing, the vehicles taxi through the rinse facility where the salt is rinsed away. Now, not only does MacDill border on salt water, but the proximity to a large urban and industrial city like Tampa and its pollutants just adds to the corrosion severity.
Pollution affects the corrosion that takes place in human-constructed features as well as natural earth features like rocks in a number of different ways. Essentially what happens is that the metals in those rocks rust. And the rusting process breaks down the structure of the rock and not only breaks it apart, but then opens it up to be weathered and broken down by other processes. You could say the same thing for building materials, buildings constructed of stone that contain these metals. Many sandstones contain these metals, and the same processes would be at work, and the materials would break down. There's a realization that there are air pollution problems in many big cities like Tampa, but there's also the realization that something needs to be done about it.
In Tampa, corrosion is felt everywhere due to its location on the Gulf. It looks as though our data confirms that corrosion is a present danger, with a reading of 51,000 on our corrosion scale. Moving across Florida now from the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic Ocean, we come to Cocoa Beach, home of Patrick Air Force Base. Patrick is located on a large barrier island in Brevard County. Patrick's location means every vehicle here is collecting salt deposits.
A rescue ops for us is low-level water ops over salt water, and that's just detrimental to the plane. Any kind of salt water, just deteriorates almost any kind of metal. Our plane being mostly made up of aluminum and magnesium, you can just imagine that when what we call our PJs, our pararescue guys, submerge themselves in water and come back into the plane, that after a mission, it's just completely soaked.
Tourism is a key economic factor here on the Space Coast. Now, tourism depends on the many condominiums, cruise ships, ports, docks, piers, and hotels, so corrosion mitigation is always taking place.
We need to keep up with corrosion here because the port has a huge investment in their infrastructure. Marine structures are extremely expensive, and corrosion will just tear them to pieces. And not only that, it will cause eventually structural deficiencies, which can lead to safety problems. Some of the methods that we use to try and mitigate corrosion range from using a high-performance concrete to high-performance barrier coatings. Our older structures, though, do not have the benefit of the high-performance concrete, so we find ourselves having to go back and rework on those structures as they begin to show signs of deterioration.
Also located right nearby is Kennedy Space Center and the Space Life Sciences Laboratory at NASA. And they've also established a team which develops new strategies to ward off rust and corrosion.
Here at the Kennedy Space Center, we have a beautiful natural environment, and we are right by the ocean here, so the natural environment by itself is one of the most corrosive environments in North America and Central America. But in addition to that, the exhaust from the solid rocket boosters that you can see behind me generates, during a launch, 70 tons of hydrochloric acid. So this makes the corrosion conditions even more severe than the natural conditions. Here at the Kennedy Space Center, we have developed microcapsules that are specifically designed for corrosion control applications. These microcapsules have a polymer wall that is designed to deliver the contents of the microcapsule core when corrosion starts. So we can encapsulate corrosion indicators, corrosion inhibitors, as well as self-healing agents for coatings.
The Kennedy Space Center has helped set the stage for America's adventures into space for more than 4 decades. And the spaceport has served as the departure gate for every American manned mission and hundreds of advanced scientific spacecraft. If you look closely, you can see that our research shows a colossal 270,000 on the beach, while moving only a quarter-mile inland, our test scale decreases to 82,000. These values indicate the great effect that distance from the ocean can have on the severity of corrosion. When we have the choice, the simple act of repositioning our military and civilian assets further away from the ocean will provide great benefits. From Central Florida to Key West, corrosion's reach is widespread and crushing. The Naval Air Station located in Key West bears a national security mission. It's home to a number of unique test facilities which support scientific research, development, and education.
The NRL Corrosion Test Facility at Key West offers us the opportunity to do both atmospheric exposures as well as underwater exposures. This is critical if we're going to really evaluate the performance of systems and equipment. We also have the capability to test under calm conditions and turbulent conditions, and that makes all the difference in the world in what corrosion rates might be with certain materials. The environment of Key West is especially corrosive because of the southern latitude as well as because of the exposure to the ocean sea salts. Likewise, this Key West environment offers the ability to use natural seawater. Natural seawater can affect the corrosion rates depending on how much oxygen happens to be there, and those kind of things vary, and having the natural environment is a special advantage.
Like the other locations we have visited thus far, Key West shows some of the same corrosion concerns within the test data. A high severity number of 99,800 shows why Key West makes our list of the most corrosive places in America. Daytona Beach, sun, fun, and corrosion engineering? Well, Daytona may be known for spring break in the 500, but it also plays host to an outdoor testing facility where corrosion research is conducted with the strategy of finding new and promising ways to prevent corrosion. This hot, wet, and humid climate, with a rating of 162,000 on our scale, makes Daytona one of the preferred spots for testing materials and corrosion mitigation techniques. Moving now to the Pacific Coast, in Santa Barbara County, California, is Vandenberg Air Force Base. Home to the nation's spaceport for polar orbiting satellites, a ballistic missile testing mission, and ground-based missile defense. Here, the prevailing winds blow from the northwest off the Pacific Ocean, so the salinity levels in the atmosphere are usually very high. This, coupled with the high level of chemicals found in the sand, makes this a highly corrosive environment.
Vandenberg Air Force Base is kind of a unique place for the Air Force and the Missile Defense Agency and NRO, and we have probably the worst corrosion of a land-based launch facility anywhere in the world. Maintenance costs are astronomical here compared to anywhere else. You look at inland locations like White Sands and some of the other areas that we have, uncomparable.
At Vandenberg Air Force Base, corrosion is like a disease attacking every structure, system, and mission every day, and also rates 162,000 on our scale.
Our biggest expense and contracts for us at Missile Defense Agency is a contract that we have with the Air Force for maintenance of our launch facilities, and a good chunk of that is either corrosion-related maintenance, preventative maintenance, or repairs to equipment due to corrosion.
Currently, repairing corroded material is the main way of battling corrosion, but mitigating or helping to prevent corrosion is the wave of the future. We might not have all the answers yet, but we are making great strides in corrosion mitigation. Imagine, bridges are now being built from polymers instead of metallics. They're made from recycled materials, so they are even less expensive and last longer than other materials. Thermoplastic bridges can last over 50 years and are strong enough to hold a 70-ton Abrams tank without any upkeep or maintenance, as opposed to metal bridges which need constant attention. Finally, we need to take a look at one of the most corrosive places on the planet, ships at sea. Anyone who's owned a boat knows these challenges. Every U.S. military ship at sea is an extension of United States sovereign property. And with corrosion levels for steel 4 to 6 times higher than anywhere on land, we have to fight it every day. Data shows that conditions at deck level where aircraft might be located can be incredibly severe. Lower decks, such as hangar bays, show corrosion rates might be significantly lower. So, what does that prove? Well, something as simple as sheltering can have huge effects on inhibiting corrosion. An example of this is how putting your car in the garage will protect your vehicle from the elements. Corrosion is a complicated problem, but it's also a natural process. We'll never be able to stop corrosion, but we can continue to find new ways to slow it down, which saves money by extending the service life of structures or equipment. In this case, you have to spend money to save money. In fact, recently, the U.S. Government Accountability Office recommended hundreds of cost-cutting strategies for scores of agencies. However, the advice for the Department of Defense was just the opposite. It was to spend more money on fighting corrosion. We realize that we can no longer afford to sit back and be reactive. We must move to take the offensive and be proactive. Prevention and mitigation is critical to the management of corrosion. The bottom line is, improved corrosion prevention and control practices could help avoid billions in unnecessary costs. This is where the efforts of the Department of Defense, in partnership with universities and industry, using elements of science, technology, communication, and education, are truly paying off. I'm LeVar Burton. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some of America's most corrosive places. And remember, rust never sleeps.